He didn't fight back. He didn't speak up. He didn't even flinch when they pulled his arms behind his back. The cuffs clicked shut with the kind of finality only a courtroom can echo. To most people in that room, he was just another silent man in a worn-out coat. No ID, no lawyer, no family, no context, just another name on a docket. Until one officer whispered, "Check the tattoo," and everything stopped, because that wasn't just ink. That was the mark of a unit that hadn't lost a man in 17 years. A unit that didn't talk about what it did, that didn't leave people behind. 20 minutes later, the courtroom doors opened again. And when a 4-star general walked in without warning, without escort, without delay, and approached the bench, no one dared breathe. He didn't ask. He didn't argue. He stood tall and said 6 words that made the judge put the gavel down. "You just handcuffed a national secret. If this story made you pause, if you believe some men carry their silence louder than medals, subscribe to Endless Stories, where honor walks in after the facts, and truth always gets the last word." He didn't give a name. Not when they stopped him. Not when they questioned him. Not even when the court clerk asked him to confirm his identity. He simply stood there, hands behind his back, boots dusty, jacket zipped up too high for the spring weather, eyes forward like he was still standing post in a place that didn't exist on any map. The arrest report said he was trespassing. He had walked into a closed government facility at 2:13 a.m. with no ID and no explanation. The guard said he didn't look confused. He looked deliberate. When they asked why he was there, he said nothing. Just handed them a bullet casing and sat down on the curb like he'd been waiting for someone to pick him up. They thought he was homeless, or off his meds, or maybe one of those shadow vets who slipped through the system and never came back. But none of that explained the scar under his jaw, or the custom-fitted boots with the same pattern as recon units, or the tattoo behind his left ear so small you wouldn't see it unless you were trained to. In the courtroom, he was case number 187C. No lawyer, no motion filed. The judge was already annoyed. "State your name for the record," she said again. Silence. "If you don't speak, we will proceed as a refusal." He blinked once, then reached into his coat slowly. The bailiff moved forward. "Hands where I can see." But the man only pulled out a folded piece of paper. Yellowed. Edges soft. No writing on the outside. The clerk took it. Opened it. Inside was a photo. Old. Grainy. Black and white. It showed a group of 6 men standing in front of a tattered flag. All in fatigues. All with their faces blurred, except one. The man in the middle. The same man now standing in front of the bench. The judge frowned. "What is this?" The man finally spoke. His voice was gravel. Precise. That was the last time anyone saw them alive. The room quieted. "Are you saying you're a veteran?" No answer. The bailiff stepped closer. "Sir, we need full cooperation or we'll have to proceed with detainment." The man didn't move, didn't blink, didn't resist when they turned him, cuffed him, and walked him down the center aisle like a criminal. It was supposed to be routine, a formality, until one of the court officers looked closer at the photo, then at the tattoo behind the man's ear, then left the room without a word. 10 minutes later, a black SUV pulled into the courthouse lot. No sirens, no flag, just tinted windows and tires that didn't seem to leave dust. Out stepped a man in uniform, clean, decorated, shoulders straight not from ego, but from decades of never once letting the flag touch the ground. A 4-star general. Not scheduled, not announced, just arrived. He walked straight through security. No delay. The doors opened again. The room stood still. The judge froze. The general didn't salute. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look at the cuffs. He simply walked to the front, nodded at the bench, and said 6 words that made every jaw tighten. "You just handcuffed a national secret." No one in the room moved for a full 5 seconds after the general spoke. Even the stenographer paused, waiting to hear if those 6 words were real or part of a misunderstanding. But the general didn't repeat himself. He didn't need to. His uniform said the rest. The ribbons, the bars, The way his collar sat like it had never been allowed to wrinkle. "Your Honor," he continued calmly, "if this man is in custody, I need him released immediately. He is not to be charged, not to be questioned, not to be photographed." The judge blinked. "I'm sorry, General, but—" "No, ma'am," he said. "You're not. You simply don't know what you're holding." He turned to the bailiff. "Take off the cuffs. Now." The bailiff looked at the judge, who nodded slowly, unsure whether she was still in charge of her own courtroom. The man in the coat stood still, wrists behind his back, as the cuffs were removed. His hands dropped gently to his sides. No rubbing, no flexing, like they'd never bothered him to begin with. "He's classified," the general said. "That's not a metaphor. His name, his rank, his record, they were all burned when his unit was disbanded. No backups, no medals, just memory." The judge stared. "That's not possible." "It's not just possible," he replied. "It was protocol." He turned to the man. "You broke that protocol by being here. So I'm going to ask you one time why." The man didn't speak. He reached into his coat and handed the general a folded napkin. The general opened it. "Read 3 lines." And his face changed, not with panic, but with gravity. "Understood," he said. Then, to the room, "Everyone who saw him today will sign an NDA. If you cannot follow that order, you will be reassigned by morning." He looked at the judge. "This case is sealed. This record is gone." And just like that, the general turned, walked beside the man, and together they exited the courtroom without another word. Sarah, the young intern who had been shadowing the court reporter, whispered, "Who is he?" But no one answered. The docket was cleared, the bench recessed, and everyone who had seen it would remember, but never speak of it again. 2 hours later, in a private room deep inside a building that didn't have a name, the man sat across from the general. The same photo was laid on the table. The general stared at it. "You shouldn't have shown up. You know that." The man nodded. "But you knew I would." "Why now?" The man leaned forward. "Because the last name they tried to erase just died. That leaves me." The general exhaled. "Long, there are no files left. No gear. No chain of command." "That's the point," the man said. "If the name dies in silence, the mission never happened. And if the mission never happened, we lose more than memory." The general sat back. "You want me to authorize a record?" The man nodded. "Not for me. For them. That would mean opening sealed files. Risking exposure." "No," the man said. "It means doing what we were supposed to do before they folded the flag and told us to disappear." The general looked at the photo again. "And what would you have them say about you?" The man shook his head. "Nothing. Let the booth stay empty. Let the flag speak. But put their names where someone can find them. Even if it's just a plaque in a hallway no one walks through anymore." The general stood. "I'll make the call." "You already did," the man replied. "By showing up." And as he turned to leave, the general asked, "What should I call you, at least in my head?" The man paused, looked back. "Just the one who came back. That's enough." It was mounted in the basement. Not the grand hall. Not the marble rotunda where senators gave speeches about sacrifice they never made. No, the plaque was set in the far wall of a corridor beneath a building where silence walked louder than boots, and access required a fingerprint most people didn't have. It wasn't large. 12 inches across. Brass. A little uneven on one corner. There was no title. No headline. No unit name. Just 7 lines of text. Each line was a name. No ranks. No dates. Just letters. Some clearly American. Some not. Some with spacing that hinted at missing vowels or changed identities. Below the names, a final sentence. They were there, so others wouldn't have to be. That was it. No flowers. No press. No social media post. Just a quiet installation supervised by 2 men who never saluted and never spoke more than they had to. The general stood beside the man and said nothing. When the last screw was in place, they stepped back. Looked at it. One of the maintenance men wiped the edge clean with a rag. Then they left. As they walked toward the elevator, the general asked, "Was this enough?" The man didn't answer immediately. Then he said, "It's more than I expected, less than they deserved." The general nodded, which means it's probably exactly right. Outside, the air smelled like rain. Somewhere across the city, someone raised a flag. Somewhere else, someone folded one. The man walked until his legs hurt. Then he sat at a park bench and stared ahead, watching civilians walk dogs, drink coffee, laugh at things that would never matter in a war zone. He didn't resent them. He just didn't recognize them. That night, he returned to the booth. Not the courtroom. The booth. The one with the flag. Sarah had just finished wiping it down. "I saved your usual seat," she said, even though he'd never placed an order. He nodded once, sat down, looked at the cup. Still warm. Still black. He reached into his coat, pulled out the same folded napkin from the courtroom, placed it beneath the saucer, then reached into the other pocket and took out a coin. Not a military challenge coin. Something older. Worn. Foreign. He placed it beside the cup. "They carried this through the mission," he said quietly. "They flipped it before every decision." "Heads?" she asked. "We go," he said. "Tails?" He paused. "We go anyway, but at least we knew the odds." She didn't ask more. She just nodded and stepped back. The next morning, the coin was still there. So was the napkin. Someone added a second cup. Cold. Symbolic. 2 seats now faced the window. That afternoon, a man in a military contractor jacket stopped by, looked at the coin, left a bullet casing beside it. The day after, someone else left a compass. Then a name tag. Then a unit patch. Within a week, the table looked less like a tribute and more like a timeline. Not of war, but of silence. And every night, the man walked by. Never claimed it. Never sat again. But each morning, Sarah found a new piece under the salt shaker. Folded paper. Scrawled handwriting. Coordinates. Phrases. One said, "They had a name once, but they gave it up." Another said, "You're only forgotten when no one listens, so keep the seat open." She started collecting them. Quietly. No display. Just a shoebox beneath the counter marked, "When they ask, show them this." And still, the plaque remained in the basement. No flowers. No tours. But somehow, the hallway began to get more traffic. A janitor stayed a little longer near it. A courier paused every morning. Someone started leaving a single coin beneath the plaque each Friday. No note. No explanation. Just placement. Precision. And still, the man walked the perimeter. Never stopped. Never waved. Because now, his mission wasn't to be remembered. It was to keep them from being erased. He never wore a uniform, but he walked like someone who used to. Shoulders upright. Gait efficient. Not rushed, not slow. Just enough. Every weekday morning at 8:04 a.m., he pushed open the door to the diner with the same hand, nodded at Sarah without speaking, and placed a single envelope on the booth's table, right next to the folded flag. White. Sealed. No stamp. No address. And never opened by anyone. He never explained. Never lingered. Never ate. Just delivered. Then gone. The first time it happened, Sarah thought it was a mistake. Some mix-up. Some quiet veteran's way of saying thank you. But when he did it again the next day, and the next, and then again the following week, she began to understand. This wasn't for her. It wasn't for show. It was for something else. She asked Paul once, "Should I open one?" He shook his head. "Some messages aren't meant for us. We're just here to make sure they arrive." So she left them alone, stacked them in order, labeled only by the day of the week. No name, no content, just presence. And that's when things started to change. Because every few days someone new would come in and sit near the booth. Not in it, not even across from it. Just near. They'd look at the envelope. Sometimes nod. Sometimes tear up. Sometimes reach into their coat and place something of their own beside it. A matchbook. Playing card. A single dog tag. And then one Tuesday, the envelope was already on the table before Sarah opened the diner. That morning, the man in the coat, the one who'd once been handcuffed in court, stood across the street, watching, eyes locked on the table. She waved. He didn't move, but something about the way he stood, arms still, breath slow, said everything. The message had been delivered. Later that day, Sarah opened one envelope. Just one. She didn't read it. She didn't dare. But inside, she found a photograph. 6 men. Same ones from the original photo. This time, they weren't blurred. This time, their faces were clear. Young. Tired. Alive. On the back, one sentence written in black pen. In case we're erased, remember us as we were, before the forgetting began. She slid the photo back in, resealed it, and placed it beneath the table, taped in a thin plastic sleeve so no coffee spill or curious hand could damage it. From then on, the man in the jacket became part of the place. Not just a messenger, a witness. People began to greet him, not with words, but with presence. One veteran, missing 2 fingers, placed a harmonica on the table beside his envelope and said softly. He played this in the sand. Said it reminded him of Kansas. Another left a single military ribbon with a note. Didn't earn it. He gave it to me when mine was lost. The booth became heavier, not in burden but in gravity. A center of orbit for those who thought no one remembered. Until one morning the man didn't come. 8:04 passed, then 8:15, then 9.
No envelope.
At first Sarah thought maybe it was weather, or illness, or bureaucracy, but at 11:17, a new man walked in, clean-shaven, eyes that scanned the diner in one sweep and landed directly on the booth. He walked over, reached into his coat, and placed an envelope down. This one was marked. 3 letters in block handwriting. For him. And Sarah understood. The delivery man hadn't stopped. He'd passed the watch. And the message didn't change. Only the hands who carried it. It wasn't on any floor plan. No badge opened it. No directory listed it. But it existed beneath concrete, behind 2 steel doors, and guarded not by personnel, but by silence. It was the room without windows. The man who once sat silently in court now stood at the entrance. No longer escorted. No longer watched. He entered with the same precision he'd once used to clear buildings. Slow, measured, purposeful. The air was cool, recycled. Fluorescence hummed overhead, not out of neglect, but out of permanence. This place wasn't designed for comfort. It was designed for containment. Inside, the walls were lined with lockers, none numbered, none labeled. Each one identical, each one locked. But in the center of the room stood a single table. Metal, square, and on it, 7 folders. Thin, worn, faded.
No barcodes.
No tabs, just names, or what passed for them. He sat, opened the first folder. Inside, a map, a mission plan written in shorthand. A photo of 3 faces, all marked with red XS. A note, mission scrubbed. Survivors, 0. Reality, unknown. He closed the folder, opened the second. Inside, a page torn from a child's notebook, smudged with dust. A coordinate scrawled in blue crayon. A line. He said not to wait past sunrise. Each folder wasn't just a record. It was a memory rescued from erasure. He wasn't here to correct them. He was here to protect them. He stayed for hours, reading, noting, remembering, not for himself, but for the man who delivered the envelopes, for the 4-star general who spoke 6 words and changed a courtroom, for the flag folded on the booth table that refused to fade no matter how many mornings passed. Then he stood, pulled from his coat a small black book, worn leather. Inside, names never spoken, faces never identified. He opened locker number 4. No key, no code, just pressure in the right place like those trained would know. He placed the book inside, shut the door, clicked once, and then he left. No one asked where he'd been. But the next morning, an envelope appeared on the booth table. Unmarked, but heavier than the rest. It looked like any other mug. White ceramic. Hairline cracked down the handle. faint coffee stain on the rim that wouldn't wash out no matter how hard Sarah scrubbed. It had been in the diner since before she started working there, probably long before the captain ever chose his booth. But this mug was the one always placed at the seat with the flag. Always. No one questioned it. No one moved it. It became part of the routine. Cup, flag, silence, coffee. Until one morning it didn't sit flat. Sarah noticed it the second she placed it down. It wobbled, just slightly, enough to make the saucer rattle. She checked underneath. Nothing. Wiped the bottom. Still uneven. So she turned it over. And that's when she saw it. A series of etchings on the underside of the base. Faint. Not from manufacturing. Scratched by hand. For sets of numbers. Coordinates. And beneath them, 3 words. If found, remember. She blinked. Heart suddenly pounding. She copied the numbers. Entered them into her phone. The first set led to a forest clearing outside Fallujah. The second to a riverbank in Serbia. The third, deep into an abandoned airstrip in Alaska. The fourth, it led to the parking lot behind the diner. She stood frozen, coffee pot still in her hand, the mug back on the table still warm. Later that day, she approached the man, the one who never said his name but had returned, again and again. She slid the paper across the counter. These were under the mug. He looked at the coordinates, said nothing, but his jaw set tighter. Why this place? She asked. He tapped the last set of numbers. Because this was where we ended it. Ended what? He looked at her for the first time like he wanted to answer. Then he said, there was a final mission, a last fallback, in case the others failed. It didn't require guns. Just silence, presence, and a place that would never be noticed by anyone not already looking. You mean this diner? He nodded. This booth. He nodded again. And suddenly the mug wasn't just ceramic. It was a marker, a message to whoever might stumble in, whoever still remembered, whoever might carry something they weren't supposed to speak out loud. That night, Sarah locked the diner with her hands shaking. She didn't sleep. She kept picturing the mug, the booth, the fourth coordinate. She didn't know what was buried behind the diner, but she knew it wasn't over. She waited until the sky turned gray. Not fully dark, just enough to make people forget where they were going and why they had gone outside in the first place. She parked behind the diner, far from the delivery bay, closer to the tree line that bordered the gravel lot. The coordinates matched, down to the last decimal. She paced 12 feet from the back corner of the foundation, turned 45 degrees, and there it was. A patch of dirt where grass refused to grow, where the soil always looked damp, even in the heat. It wasn't a grave. It wasn't marked. But it was hollow. She knelt, hands shaking, pulled a small garden trowel from her backpack, and began to dig. The dirt moved easily. Too easily. No rocks. No roots. Just soft ground. Someone had been here before. Not recently, but not long ago either. 3 inches down she hit something. Metal. Tin box. Standard military issue. Olive green. No markings. She hesitated. Looked around. The wind was still. The diner lights off. No one watching. She opened it. Inside, wrapped in a cloth, was a single cassette tape. Labeled only with the letters AFR and a number, 41. No player. No instructions. Just that. She closed the lid, reburied the box, and walked back into the diner without turning the lights on. The man was already inside, sitting at the booth. Coffee untouched. Eyes on the window. You found it, he said. She nodded. What does AFR mean? He looked at the cup. A field report. From you. He didn't answer. She placed the tape on the table. Why bury it? Because some things aren't meant to be destroyed, he said. But they're not ready to be heard either. She slid into the seat across from him. Then why leave it for me? He looked at her like she already knew. You stayed, he said, when most people only pass through. She stared at the tape. What's on it? Proof, he said. Of what? That silence isn't always an accident. They sat there for several minutes. No one else came in. No music played. The booth seemed heavier that night. Not because of the tape, because the truth had been closer than anyone realized. And now it was waking up. She found the player at a pawn shop 10 blocks away. No one had asked why she needed a tape deck in 2025. The man behind the counter just shrugged and said, "Still works, I think." She brought it into the diner after hours, turned the closed sign outward, locked the door behind her, and sat alone at the third booth from the window. The flag was still folded, the mug still warm. The cassette, labeled AFR 41, felt heavier than it should have in her palm. She inserted it into the deck, pressed play, and waited for the hiss. The sound that followed wasn't a voice. Not at first. It was wind, the kind of wind that wraps around sandbags and wire. Then a low murmur. Men talking but distant. Then static. Then a single phrase, clear, cold, deliberate. AFR 41. Redacted drop zone secured. 7 in, 2 out. Objective compromised. Secondary asset acquired. Then silence. For 12 seconds. Then another voice. Different. Quieter. Do not send extraction. If this message reaches you, we were followed. Another pause. Then a third voice. Calm. Familiar. Her eyes widened. It was the man. The one who never gave his name. The one who walked in and out of courtrooms and never left a footprint. I repeat, his voice said. Do not acknowledge this transmission. AFR 41 is not a mission. It is a warning. Then a long tone. Then nothing. She hit stop. Rewound. Played again. Same words. Same wind. Same silence. She sat still for minutes. Not breathing. Not blinking. Because what she'd just heard wasn't a report. It was a goodbye. And not one meant for public ears. The man walked in 15 minutes later. He didn't need to ask if she'd listened. He saw it in her face. You weren't supposed to hear that, he said. Then why bury it where I'd find it? Because someone needed to know. Someone who wouldn't use it. Just hold it. She pointed at the tape deck. What happened to the other 5? He shook his head. They didn't make it past the 4th hour. And you? I stopped counting. She handed the tape to him. What do you want me to do with this? Hide it, he said. In plain sight. So she did. She taped it to the bottom of the booth, just beneath the center beam. No one would see it unless they crawled under. But now it lived there, not as evidence, as memory. And the next morning, when the usual envelope appeared, Sarah slipped a note inside it. Just 4 words. I heard the tape. No reply ever came. But the next week, when the envelope arrived, there was a second item beneath it. A folded American flag. Not the one from the booth. A different one. Frayed, worn, and stitched into the edge. AFR 41. She placed it beneath the table. Out of sight. Right where it was meant to be. It happened on a Wednesday. The kind of Wednesday where the sun never really came out, and everything outside the diner felt like a photo printed in grayscale. Sarah was cleaning the counter, wiping down mugs that didn't need cleaning, when she heard the bell above the door. She looked up, expecting one of the regulars. But it wasn't. It was a girl, no older than 16, wearing a hoodie 2 sizes too big, sleeves pulled over her fists, hair tied in a knot that said she hadn't slept in a while. She didn't speak, didn't ask, just walked straight to the third booth, the one with the flag, the mug, the weight of everything, and sat down. Sat in the seat no one had ever taken. Not in years. Not since it began. Sarah froze. Everyone in the diner stopped. Even the old man in the corner, who usually didn't notice anything but crossword puzzles and weak coffee. The air thinned. The moment stretched. Sarah stepped forward. Sweetheart, I don't think you want to sit there. The girl looked up. Her eyes didn't blink. I do, she said. He was my father. And the whole place tilted, not physically but in weight. No one had ever claimed the seat. Not even the man who returned week after week. But this girl didn't ask permission. She just belonged. Sarah walked to the booth. Sat across from her. I didn't know he had a daughter. He didn't talk about me. the girl said. That was part of the deal. I was the part of his life that stayed civilian. That stayed safe. Why come now? She pulled a folded piece of paper from her hoodie pocket. Opened it slowly. A letter. Handwritten. Faded. It read, "If I don't come home, tell her I was at peace when it ended. Tell her I sat where people remembered, even when they didn't know who they were remembering. Tell her the seat was never for me. It was for her to sit down and start again." Sarah read it twice before setting it down. The girl looked around. "They kept this place going," she whispered. "All of them. For him." Sarah nodded. "For you," she said. They didn't move for a long time. Outside, it started to rain. Inside, for the first time in years, the seat was filled. Not by a soldier, not by a veteran, not by a shadow, but by the future. And the silence that followed didn't feel like reverence. Felt like healing. She didn't speak much that day, or the day after. She returned quietly every morning at 7:01 a.m., sat in the same seat, the one no one had touched in years, and opened a small notebook. Not digital. Not a tablet. A real notebook. Spiral-bound. The edges frayed. The cover faded with a sticker that said, "Keep out," in handwriting too young to take seriously. She didn't write like a girl. She wrote like someone who had waited too long to put it into words. The first few pages were just names. Names she remembered. Names she'd overheard. Names whispered by her father during the nights when he thought she was asleep. Then came the questions. Why did he always check under the car? Why did he never sit with his back to a door? Why did he flinch at thunder but not fireworks? Why did he smile only when someone else was crying? She filled a page with memories. Of breakfasts eaten in silence. Of drives that never had destinations. Of stories told with a single nod and nothing more. And then, on the fifth morning, she started reading them aloud. First, it was just Sarah. Then Paul joined. Then a man in a postal jacket who said nothing but listened like he owed her his ears. Soon, others sat nearby. One man brought his own notebook. A woman held her father's dog tags in her hands like a rosary, and still she read. Not loudly, not dramatically, just honestly. My father never told me he was in AFR 41. He told me he was a mechanic, but his hands were too clean, his stare too heavy. I asked him once why he never slept. He said, "Because someone has to stay awake." One morning, she pulled a small velvet pouch from her coat. Inside was a medal, unmarked.
Not even.
Just a disc of dull metal with a single star carved into its surface. She placed it on the booth table. "He said this wasn't for bravery," she said. "He said it was for silence." Sarah stepped forward. "May I?" The girl nodded. Sarah held the medal. It was cold, heavier than it looked. She placed it beside the mug. "I think," she whispered, "this story is yours now." And so the girl kept coming, and people kept listening, until one day someone brought a camera. Not for YouTube, not for the news, just a local filmmaker. He sat. He asked, and she said yes. The video never showed her face, only her hands, turning pages, holding the medal, tracing her father's name in the corner of a napkin. The voiceover was hers, calm, steady, broken only when she said, "He never told his story because it wasn't his to tell, but maybe it's mine now." The video went viral, quietly, no drama, no controversy, just reverence. And one day, when she arrived at the diner, the booth was full, not with people, with letters, hundreds of them, folded, addressed, marked. To the girl who remembers. She sat, opened the first, and began reading again. They didn't stop. Not after the first 100. Not after the first 1,000. The post office began stacking bins labeled only with one line. For the girl at the booth. The carrier didn't ask. He just delivered. Every morning at 6:45 a.m., he pushed through the door, nodded to Sarah, and left the day's haul in a weathered crate beneath the counter. Sarah tried to count them at first, but numbers felt hollow, because these weren't just letters. They were confessions, memories, questions, thanks, One envelope contained a single dog tag and a handwritten note. He told me never to speak his name, but I want someone to whisper it now. Another was scribbled in block letters by a child. My dad doesn't talk, but he cries when he sees the flag. There were pages torn from journals, receipts with messages written on the back, Polaroids of nameless soldiers standing on dusty roads. And every single day the girl came. Same seat, same notebook, same eyes that had grown sharper, stronger, not from joy but from purpose. She opened each letter slowly. Sometimes she read them out loud. Sometimes she simply nodded, folded them again, and placed them gently into a wooden box she kept beside the booth. Paul built the box. No lid, no lock, just enough room for what people needed to give. Sarah noticed how she never sorted them, never alphabetized, never separated by war, by date, by country, because to her they were all the same kind of weight. One day, a man entered wearing a uniform that had seen more sun than rain. He walked with a cane but didn't limp. He placed a photo on the table. The girl asked, "Is this your unit?" He shook his head. "No, it's yours now." And he walked out. On Friday, a woman came in carrying ashes in a small ceramic urn. She said nothing, placed the urn beside the booth, touched the rim, then left. They kept coming. Pair of brothers. A mother who never stopped wearing black. A journalist who'd seen too much but never found the right angle until now. Even a general, no stars on his collar, no aides behind him. He sat quietly, listened to her read. And when he left, he whispered, "I was the one who ordered the blackout." She nodded, didn't forgive, didn't condemn, just nodded, because that's what remembering meant now. Not judging, not fixing, just listening. The booth began to change. Not in structure, in energy. You could feel it from the door. Something holy, heavy, alive. And still she sat, day after day, reading stories not her own, but somehow made hers, by the act of holding them with both hands and never letting them fall. It started with one frame, nothing fancy, just a piece of old wood someone had in their garage, sanded down and hung carefully on the wall near the booth. Inside was a letter. The first one ever read aloud by the girl. The one that began, "My father never told me he was in AFR 41. No signature, just that. A story pinned into memory. Then someone added another. A newspaper clipping faded with age that never made national press. Headline, "3 soldiers never found. Operation dismissed." Next to it, a sticky note with one line scribbled in red ink. They were found. Just never returned. Sarah didn't know who hung them. Neither did Paul. But by the end of the week, there were 6. The week after, 12. Each one framed by different hands. Mismatched sizes. Crooked corners. But all perfectly placed. They didn't just build a wall. They built a record. Of the quiet. Of the truth. Of what happens when you keep a chair empty long enough for people to see themselves in it. The girl didn't stop them. She didn't curate it. She didn't control it. She simply kept reading letters. And every time a new one touched someone deeply enough, it somehow ended up on the wall. Like the booth itself knew where to send it. Tourists began coming in. Not many, just enough. Word spread through the kinds of channels that didn't need hashtags, veteran halls, worn-out blogs, whispers on trains. One man drove 17 hours just to stand in front of the wall and place his forehead against the edge of the frame. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He left a key and a patch. Another brought a map with a single location circled. This was our camp. It's not on any satellite image. But it was real. We bled there. The wall grew and grew until the health inspector quietly asked if they needed a permit. Sarah said, "It's not a wall. It's a memory." The inspector paused, looked at it again, and replied, "Then I didn't see anything." One morning, a little girl entered, no more than 8. She wore her father's old cap, too big for her head. She walked straight to the booth, placed a drawing on the table, crayon sketch of a man holding hands with a shadow. "My dad was the shadow," she said, "but he still held my hand." They framed that too, hung it dead center. The girl at the booth looked up and whispered, "This wall was never meant for bricks." And Sarah, without looking away, replied, "That's why it'll never crumble." It wasn't planned. There was no announcement, no flyer, no ceremony. Just a Saturday that felt heavier than usual, like the air had thickened with something unsaid. The girl arrived earlier than normal. She wore the same hoodie, but this time her hair was down. She walked past the counter, past the stack of letters, past the usual nods and half-smiles, and stood in front of the wall. Her hand hovered over the photo of the man she never called by rank. Just Dad. She touched the frame once, then turned around and faced the room. People looked up, surprised. She never stood, never stopped reading, never stopped listening. But now, she cleared her throat and spoke. His name was Marcus Elijah Cole. A pause. The name hung there, unfamiliar to most, but sacred to her. He told me never to say it out loud. He said it was safer that way, that names are the first thing they erase when they want to forget you. Her voice didn't tremble, but something in the diner did. Forks paused midair. Coffee cooled untouched. "And now I understand why," she continued. "Because once you say it, you can't take it back. Once you give someone their name again, you admit they were real, that what they did mattered, that the silence was never emptiness. But wait." She stepped toward the booth, sat in her usual place. "He wasn't perfect," she said. "He didn't always know how to be a father, but he knew how to protect. He knew how to disappear for the right reasons. And when he came back, even if it was just to sit here and say nothing, that was his way of coming home." Sarah placed a hand over her mouth. Paul leaned against the doorway like he couldn't trust his knees. The girl reached into her notebook, pulled out a page. On it, just 3 words written in her own hand. "He was here." She folded it once, slid it across the table, placed it under the mug, then stood again. "I said his name," she whispered. "Now I want you to remember it." And one by one, without needing instruction, without needing to be told, everyone in the diner stood. No music played, no anthem, just breath and silence, and the name, still echoing even after the girl sat back down and said nothing more. From that day on, a small wooden sign appeared above the booth. Not a plaque, not brass, just carved letters. Marcus Elijah Cole sat here. No dates, no rank, because the girl had said enough, and the silence that followed would say the rest. The booth never changed. Not really. The mug stayed. The flag stayed. The girl stayed. But something had shifted. Not in the walls. Not in the lighting. In the people. They didn't walk in the same anymore. They walked slower, softer, like they were entering something sacred, not because anyone said it was, but because the air told them to. Word had spread beyond the town, beyond the state. Veterans drove days just to see it. Widows came in silence, leaving lockets and rings and folded papers. One man rode in on a bike missing a pedal. He walked straight to the booth, kissed the backrest of the seat once, and whispered, still holding position. He didn't order food. He just left his service stripes beside the salt shaker and walked out. The girl didn't need to read anymore. The letters read themselves. The wall kept growing. Not crowded, never cluttered, just complete. And then came the call. A man from Washington. Not a politician. Not a bureaucrat. Just someone who had heard. Who had lost. Who wanted to help. He offered a statue. A plaque. A foundation. Sarah asked the girl what she thought. She said, "We already have one." He didn't understand. She pointed at the seat. "At this booth, we don't build monuments. We leave room." And he understood. So no statue came. No brass engraving. But every few weeks, new names arrived, submitted anonymously, written carefully. They weren't famous. They weren't high-ranking. They were remembered. And at the end of each month, Sarah would take the list, hand it to the girl, and she'd read them one by one. And after every name, she'd say the same line, "Seat reserved." Because in a world that forgets quickly, this place had decided to never forget again. The girl grew older. The letters slowed. The wall stood. And one day the booth was quiet again. No visitors. No envelope. Just the seat. The mug. The folded flag. And in the hush of that morning, Sarah sat down across from the empty place. She didn't speak. She didn't write. She just rested her hand on the table and whispered, "Thank you for sitting. Now rest." The seat stayed empty, not from loss, but from choice, because some chairs aren't meant to be filled forever. Some are meant to remind us why we stand. If the story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you still carry in silence, don't let their seat be forgotten. Subscribe to Endless Stories, where every silence is sacred, every story is a seat saved, and every name, spoken or not, is never truly gone.